All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webinar, Salary Data and Contract Review Tips with Kyle Clausen. I'm going to give everyone a couple minutes to log on. So while everyone's still logging on, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Peyton Jennings. I am the Physician Engagement Coordinator here at Practice Match. A lot of you attending might already know me because I work closely with the Physician Ambassador Program and the residents and fellows that attend our career fairs. If you're here tonight, you kind of have, already been in a webinar or you've already heard from me via email. But if you have any questions about anything, feel free to reach out to me after the webinar. Kyle, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and take it away.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks. Well, I'm glad you guys hopped on tonight. I hope you guys have lots of questions. I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes on just things that I think you should look out for in your contracts, different areas that you can find access to information on salary data and just information in general on contracts. And then the Q&A is open, the chat is open, so please use that at any point in time throughout this, and we can stop and talk through slides. I'm going to hop off video while we talk through this, and then I'll come back on at the end. So with that, let's get going. The first thing that I want you guys to think about when you're entering the market and getting a contract, maybe for the first time, I think understanding that there's been a shortage, right, of physicians for a long time is important, but I think everybody knows that. And what I really want you to start to think about is what the market looks like, right? We know there's a shortage, but we also know that there's a lot of consolidation that's happening, and we know that there's a lot of attrition from physicians. And so when we talk about consolidation, now over, 3/4 of you are entering into an employed situation. So 75 to 80% are going to come out and not be in private practice. You're not going to be working in an organization that allow you to have ownership at some point in time. You're going to be an employee. Okay. And so I think that's important to think about, right? As far as who the other side is on this, right? Who the employer is that you're dealing with and that you're negotiating with. And also understanding that, most physicians have some level of burnout right now. About 20% plan to leave medicine unless things change. And so there's certainly a lot of discussion on what can we do, right, to keep physicians engaged in that process, right? And so there's been surveys, a lot of physicians have been, asked on this question of what can we do. Fair compensation, call coverage, time off, and autonomy are the things that get mentioned most frequently as reasons why that they would like to stay right in the profession. That's the easiest way to retain physicians, which is really important. Okay. And so knowing that, we're going to talk through that it's a great time right now for you guys to be in this position, right? You should have some leverage based on those things. And we're going to talk about your strategy to go through a contract and what you should be looking for. So the first thing I want you to do is identify priorities for yourself. We're not going to talk a lot about that, but we are going to talk about what that looks like from a organizational standpoint. We're going to help you understand what risk looks like in a contract. We're going to help you understand how to get access to data and how to review data for your documents, and then also finally how to negotiate and what that should look like. Okay. So the first thing I want you to do is identify priorities for yourself. Obviously, there are things like where you want to live, right, that are going to be important, and we're not going to talk about that at all tonight. Very personal to you. But what I do want you to consider is the type of organization that you want to work for and what that may mean for your contract. And I'm not posing this as health systems, private equity, or private practice are good or bad. I think it's just that you need to understand that in some of these situations, what you're going to receive for guaranteed comp and contractual terms is a little bit different. And also what you're going to have for autonomy, both in the contract language and long-term, is going to be different. So you're most likely to find higher guaranteed comp packages from a health system, from a private equity, owned group, things where you don't have ownership long-term. Those also tend to come with less autonomy. And so I think it shouldn't be too surprising that the kind of counter position to that is if you're in private practice, generally speaking, you're going to have lower guaranteed comp, signing bonuses that are smaller, maybe student loan reimbursement that's not there, but you're going to have a higher degree of autonomy and potential ownership long term. And I think as you think about that, again, not that any of these are better or worse than the others, but you certainly don't want to end up in the bottom left quadrant on this. You don't want to have low autonomy and also low guaranteed comp. And you want to try to get yourself as far into the right into the top of this as you can, right? So my daughters like unicorns. I don't think that those are impossible to get to, but I do think you're going to have to work hard to craft a document to get you into that setting. First question that's coming in, which is perfect. What is a private equity group? Okay, so what I mean by private equity is that it's a organization that is owned and has whether it's partial ownership or majority ownership from an investment firm. And so if you take a look at your specialty that you're in, some private equity companies are heavier, right, in certain specialties than others. But you can think about emergency medicine as one that's been in the news quite a bit, where a lot of these investment firms have come in, purchased a lot of different ER groups, Envision, right, the Team Healths, right, things like that of the world. If you're joining a private practice right now as well, I would be very careful, and we're going to talk about this in a second, but I'd be careful on what their long-term plan is, right? Private practice we know is a minority position right now. And so if you're planning on joining that type of organization, I think you need to be asking them about private equity. Has private equity approached them? Are they, thinking about getting bought out? Has a health system approached them? Are they thinking about merging and consolidating with them as well? So it's just different ownership types when we talk about health systems, private equity, and private practice. So great question. And that'll have some implications as we move through this. So please keep any and all questions coming. Okay. Second thing I want you to do after you identify, kind of type of organization that you might be interested in is how do we identify contract risk? And I've got a chart here for you that I'd prefer that you think about your contracts in 3 different categories of main issues and kind of high level issues. The first category on the left here is what I would call your duties and responsibilities, right? What am I supposed to do? What are my obligations under the contract to the employer? This would include things like where you're supposed to work, how often you're supposed to work, how much call you're going to take, right? Those first 3, from my experience with clients, cause a lot of heartburn and dissatisfaction later on if they were told one thing in an interview, meaning you're going to have every Friday afternoon off and call is 1 in 6, and then they get to the job and it's quite different than that. If your document and your contract doesn't specify some of those details, or at least give you some control over that, you may find yourself in a position where situations have changed and now your contract doesn't protect you, right, on what your responsibilities are. If you take that a little bit further, there's other things like, do you want to work in any type of side gig, right? Do you want to do any locum work or work as a consultant, do expert witness testimony, all of the things that would fall outside of your normal 40 hours a week, right, for your employer. That's going to be covered in an outside activities paragraph. Intellectual property would potentially fall into that as well. If you create anything outside of the employed agreement, whether that's things that you can trademark or copyright or patent, the language is going to start out very favoring and very heavily favoring the employer, in almost every setting. So it's going to say that you're not allowed to do outside activities. You're not allowed to, create any intellectual property that you want to keep. Everything's going to belong to the employer, and you have to get their consent to work those outside activities. So if those things are important to you, my suggestion would be to pay attention to those paragraphs and get some language in there that will correct that. Okay. And then finally, the last couple of things in that category that we run into from our clients frequently is, one, if you're in any type of teaching role, right, or academic role, carving out time for research, teaching, right, as well as your clinical time and patient-facing time is important. If you're not in an academic setting, we have a lot of clients that still want time dedicated for administrative work, right, charting and things like that. So your FTE status and your FTE allocation, you can negotiate, as well as if you want to supervise and collaborate with APPs. So physician assistants, nurse practitioners, things like that. Very common now to have that. If you're going to be responsible to supervise and collaborate, you should, one, have some control over the number that you're going to do that, and also make sure you're getting paid, right, for that time. Okay, so that's column one of issues that I want you to spot and think about. The second area is anything that touches on compensation. We absolutely want to make sure you're being paid fairly, that you understand your comp plan and your comp model. And we're going to walk through a couple of examples of that in a few slides of what those different models can look like. But you're likely going to run into a situation where you have some type of guaranteed base salary along with a production bonus and potentially a quality bonus on top of that. Okay. Those are things that apply every single year. Okay. So when we talk about a base and production can take the form of either a work RVU model or a collection model or a gross charges model or billings, right? It's kind of the same thing as gross charges. There's going to be some metrics that you have to hit, right? A threshold of production that you need to meet. And if you cross that production threshold, you're going to get a bonus on top of your base salary. Quality is going to be things like patient satisfaction, attending meetings, right? Things like that. Quality bonuses are very subjective from what we see. And so we would prefer that that's not a major part of your comp plan, that it's, less than 10% at most of what you're being paid should fall into something that's subjective. And you're going to want most of that compensation into the base and the productivity component. I'm going to pause there for 1 second because we have another question that came in. Can we briefly explain what FTE is? Okay, so FTE just means your kind of your full-time equivalent, right? So if you're a full-time employee, you're a 1.0 FTE. If you're going to work 80%, that's considered 0.8, right? And if you're 50%, it's 0.5. So it's just a metric of how we're tracking your FTE status and how much time you're going to dedicate. And so when we talk about administrative, right, in that last column, administrative time, research time, et cetera, we'll often see an FTE breakdown that will say your 0.7 FTE for patient facing or clinical time and your 0.2 FTE for teaching, and then also your 0.1 for admin, right? So it's 7 and 2 and 1, right, to get you to that back to that full 1.0 FTE status. Different ways to do it. You can do it by hours. You can do it by, other metrics as well. We most commonly see it viewed as a portion of FTE. Okay. Next question. How do we find out how much is fair for a work RVU threshold and how much per dollar or how much per work RVU should we be paid, particularly if the payer mix is mostly private insurance? Okay. So we're going to get to that in a second. Let me finish this slide and we'll talk about how we find data and review data here in a minute. Okay. All right. So other things that you're going to think about in a compensation plan, you're very frequent to have a signing bonus, very common to have a signing bonus and a relocation allowance. We see those in, 70 to 90%, I would say, of the contracts that we see have some type of commencement bonus or starting bonus with them along with relocation. Other benefits are very common as well, like health insurance, retirement plans, some life insurance, some disability insurance from a group side may be there. And other incentives at times, right? You may see student loan repayment, you may see retention bonuses, and other things that come into play, housing stipends, depending on the, level of need, how long a job posting has been out there, how many they're hiring, if they need, 3 of your specialty versus they just need 1, and how many applicants they have. All those things factor into what they're going to offer as other incentives. But I think it's important to know that most benefits, right? Most things that fall into the group benefits category, like health insurance and retirement plans, you're not going to be able to negotiate those. Those are going to be set by the employer for all employees. And so it's really important to understand them and to know what type of value is being placed into those categories, because it may affect how hard you want to push on your base compensation, for example, or your signing bonus. But it's not a negotiable point because they can't change it for one person, right? They have contracts with these carriers like Fidelity or Schwab or whoever they run their retirement plan through, and so they can only modify that once a year when they go back in, and it has to be for the entire company. Okay. The final category I want you to think about before we move to the next topic is anything that touches on exiting, right, or leaving the employer. You need to know how much notice you have to give if you want to transition to something else. Most commonly, we see between 2 and 4 months in the contract, but it can range anywhere from 2 weeks to a full year, right, of notice. And obviously, For you, it's kind of a double-edged sword. If you want to leave, you want it to be as short as possible. If they're going to let you go, you want it to be as long as possible usually. And so, finding that balance will be important, usually again, 2 to 4 months. Your malpractice insurance, right, is one of those group benefits that's going to be, in the compensation section. It often doesn't clearly define who pays for tail insurance on the way out, and or if you need tail insurance on the way out. Okay. And so for those of you that are unfamiliar with the different types of malpractice insurance, if you have a claims made policy, you're going to need to have someone, whether it's you or the employer, pick up tail once you leave. And the reason for that is because patients can sue you, right, for a certain amount of time for the statute of limitations. And it doesn't have to be. So if you make a mistake on your very last day and that patient has 2 years to sue you, right, to file their claim, it's most likely you're going to be working somewhere else. And if that claim comes in at that point in time, your insurance from your prior carrier or from your prior employer is the one they're going to look to. And if that insurance policy says we only cover claims that come in while you're employed, then you don't have coverage. And that's why you need tail. Okay. So that can be expensive. It can be as much value as a signing bonus. It's usually 1.5 to 2 times an annual premium. And so certainly something to pay attention to. Some specialties, it can be a 6-figure number. So really, really important. Okay. If there's any of those bonuses that you took, like a signing bonus or relocation allowance or student loan forgiveness, a lot of times those are going to have repayment obligations tied with them where you have to stay for a year or 2 before they're fully forgiven. So be careful on that. And then finally, the big one in this category for me is non-competes. And so, depending on what state you're going to, there are some states that don't allow these for physicians, but most states still do. And what a non-compete does is it says you're not allowed to practice in a certain area for a certain amount of time if this contract ends, right? And so these really reduce your leverage, not only for renegotiations with that same employer in the future, because if they say no to everything, what are you going to do? You can't leave and work within 10 miles. But it also hurts you for future employment, right, in that area. And so you got to be real certain that you either get those modified to a level that you're comfortable with, or that there's carve outs in there for certain types of termination, or that you just get it taken out entirely, which is your best option. There's been some discussion by the FTC, which some of you may be aware of, that they're trying to potentially ban these across the country. That decision won't come out until likely April of 2024. And I would not hold your breath that they're going to completely wipe them out for healthcare. There's already carve outs in there for nonprofits and things like that. And a lot of you are going to be working with a nonprofit. So my suggestion is to try to correct it yourself in your specific contract and not wait for a law to change or anything else. Okay. A couple other things in the termination side, then we'll move on to the next slide. Make sure you have access to medical records. Make sure if you're on a production model, what happens to your bonus post-termination. If you're, already in a surplus situation where you should be bonusing, what happens to that if you leave? And then finally, if there's a force majeure clause in your contract, be very, very careful on how much notice they need to give you before they can just make a change. So what force majeure does, or what it is for things that are uncontrollable by an employer, right? So acts of God, things like hurricanes and fires and pandemics, right? Well, these were never in physician contracts prior to COVID. Once COVID happened, they started getting added in because if a pandemic happens, they want the ability to change your contract, whether that be, scope, right, of what you are doing, or compensation of how much they're going to pay, or if they're going to furlough, right? All those things happened. Most of the employers were in breach of contract at that point in time. And so they're now trying to correct that with this language. So just be careful on, what things can trigger a change in your contract and how much notice they have to give you to do that. Okay. 2 more questions came in. One, is maternity leave often included in the contract? The answer is no, it's not often included. There are certain components that are, mandated, right? Like FMLA and other things. If they're going to have policies outside of that, we would recommend that you try to get that into the contract. We do see some employers being very flexible and adding in language or having a policy specifically on it. We see others that are taking a very hardline position and saying that they don't offer any maternity or paternity leave, and it's not something that they're willing to do. So I think it's certainly a point that you need to bring up when you're talking about comp and benefits, as well as other time off, right? And understanding what your total PTO looks like. Other question is, what is meant by full malpractice coverage? Because one of my offers says full coverage. That is not a legal term of art. So full coverage, I don't know what they mean by that, but I would check. So there's different types of policies. I mentioned a claims made policy before. It could be that they're calling an occurrence-based policy full coverage. So an occurrence-based policy doesn't need tail. It's almost like they're prepaying for it, right, annually. It covers your acts of malpractice, right? It doesn't matter when the claim comes in, whether it's while you're employed or after. It could mean that they're defining the coverage based on scope. So I've seen in rare cases where they will cover, your office-based practice, but not a surgical practice if you're in a 1099, type of position. So I guess I would just tell you, be careful on that and ask them what they mean by full coverage. Okay. We're going to go to the next slide here. Okay. Next question is, do health systems actually negotiate this stuff? We're gonna get to that in a second too. So hold that question. Next thing to talk about is data. Okay. I want you guys to make sure we understand. So one of the questions before was, how do I know what's a fair threshold for work RVUs? How do I know what to be paid per work RVU? There's really 3 sources in my mind that you can look at. There are employer benchmarks. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of surveys that are out there that employers will utilize for fair market value compliance purposes. So you may hear things like Stark, right? And, compliance with the IRS for nonprofit rules. They're going to utilize things like MGMA, AMGA, Sullivan and Cotter. There's some other surveys that are out there. You're going to likely see those referenced, whether it's in your contract or in a policy. And so we would certainly encourage you to get access to at least one of those surveys to know roughly, what's normal, right? What a median looks like, what a 90th percentile looks like for your specialty and for that area. The second thing that you should look at is just contracts from your peers. Okay. And that's one of the things that you would utilize with Resolve. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. But, a live stream, right, of data and offers coming in is really, really useful for you to see. And then finally, the third area, right, which is partially why you're here, right, tonight with Practice Match, is other offers, right? Making sure you have 2 or 3 offers in hand, because it'll, one, give you good data points to utilize, but it'll also give you leverage, right? If you really need maternity leave, or if you really need more comp, whatever it is, being able to have backups is a really, really good idea. Okay, so those are your 3 categories of data that I'd have you think about. And then finally, we're going to talk about how to negotiate, and then we're going to walk through a negotiation of a comp plan. So the last question was, do employers really negotiate this stuff? I feel like many are not willing to budge. Okay, every single employer, whether it's a large health system or a 2-man private practice, is going to tell you that this is our standard contract and that we never change it. Okay, that's from where we sit, looking at thousands of these, right, every year. It certainly is not true. Okay, so we have large health systems that make changes all the time. It's a minority position if they make no changes. I would tell you that I think supply and demand really has a major impact on this. I think if there's 10 candidates for the job, right, and you're looking in a city that has that, right, like, I don't know, San Diego, right, for example, you may not have as much leverage as you do in a more rural location. But I think you need to ask, right? And you're not going to know unless you ask. And so my tips for you on how to negotiate is, 1, you want to make sure you're negotiating in good faith. I think that's really important. I think you need to make sure you have alternatives, right? And that's what BATNA stands for, is what's your best alternative? If they say no to everything, if they tell you this is our standard contract and we're not going to change one single item in it, are you going to be willing to say, okay, well, I have 2 other offers and I appreciate your interest? Or is this the one you really, really have to have, and you're not going to, even if they say no to everything, you're going to sign it? Okay, that matters, because occasionally you're going to have to take it to that point of saying, I appreciate it, I understand, but I can't sign for that. And that's the only time you're going to know whether or not they're willing to make the adjustment. Okay. And then finally, you have to ask, right? If we go into this thinking they're not going to make any changes anyway, so what's the point? Well, if that's going to be your attitude, I would tell you, don't go through the process, right? I mean, don't do it, because you have to make the ask to know if they're going to say yes or no. Okay. So let's talk through how we would do that, right? How do we negotiate in good faith? knowing what the data looks like on a comp model. All right. So let's talk about a work RVU system, right? And a comp plan for a second. And that's the first column on my example here. If you get offered 200,000, right? So the base in the very top row is 200,000. And you look at all the data points, right? The surveys, the data unresolved, you've got other offers, and you think, yep, the median is 200, right? So I think that this is a fair offer. And then you look to the next paragraph and it says, if you produce above 3,000 work RVUs, you're going to get a bonus. And that bonus is $40, right? So it's the very last part of this column. You may think, okay, that sounds great, right? I don't really know how to get to 3,000. I don't know if that's a fair number or not. You look at the data. It says that median production for your specialty for that area is about 2,500 work RVUs. So it seems close, right? We see that mistake happen a lot with physicians, especially young physicians that are coming out. And when I look at that, I see about a $20,000 deficit. Okay. So if most of your peers are earning 200,000 because that's the median, and most of your peers are producing 2,500 work RVUs because that's the median, but you're being asked to produce 3,000, that extra 500 work RVUs at $40 is worth $20,000 to you on that contract. And so if you're not asking for that or you're leaving that on the table, you know, that's a 10% decrease in your pay over the course of your career, which is going to be a big number. Okay. And so that same analysis you can use on a collection model or on a billings model, right? It's you need to compare where does my base fall, right, on the surveys, and then where does my production metrics, where do those fall on the surveys and on the data? And I need to make sure that those are aligned as much as possible. Because if I get to the 70th percentile, I would expect to earn the 70th percentile, right? And vice versa. If I'm only producing at the 30th percentile, I wouldn't be surprised if my employer, right, wanted to pay me roughly in that area too. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Make sure you're lining up not only your base with the medians, but also the production thresholds with the medians to make sure you're getting fair market value in your contract. Okay. All right. A couple other questions. Some of these are from IMGs. If there's resources to utilize to help on contract negotiations, I'm going to tell you that the site and some of the tools I'm going to share with you here in a minute, I think will help you on this to help you get access to just know what's normal, what's not normal. So hold that question. The next one is, if I did my medical school again outside the US, I don't have student loans, how can I negotiate it during an interview if they have options? Yeah, I think that's a value point, right? So we see this as well from, you know, couples sometimes that don't need a relocation allowance because their spouses or their partners, company is paying for relocation. For the employer, it's a cost no matter what. So if they're willing to offer $20,000 of student loans every year, maybe you can turn that into a retention bonus instead, right? It needs to be tied to longevity because that's what the student loan is going to do. But, you can find an equivalent way to get it there without increasing their cost at all. So I do think even if you don't have student loans, you should be asking for those funds in a different manner. Okay. Okay. Next slide, because I think some of you were asking this question, is how do we do this, right? Where's the data at? How do I utilize Resolve? So currently, there's not a lot of education on this, right? There's not a lot of technology or transparency empowering you guys on this, but that's what we do. So Resolve is here to help you guys make good career decisions and maximize your contract value. There's not only data transparency, but there's also the ability to connect with experts that are available on this topic to help you through the process. So if you go to resolve.com, there are free tools where you can go in and rate your contract. You can pick your specialty. You can decide if it's academic or not, plug in the data points, and we'll tell you if we think it needs negotiating or if it's okay, or if it's actually pretty good, right? It's satisfactory. You can kind of leave it alone. All right. There's also a live stream, like I said, of data for your specialty. There's also access to MGMA data, which is one of those surveys that we talked about. You can hop on and actually get pinged and get notified, right, every time a new data point comes out, right? So that's helpful. And then you can also connect with an attorney that's a healthcare attorney on these topics if you need to help, get help changing other things like language, right? Understanding tail coverage, making adjustments and redlining, having help negotiating the contracts, et cetera. Okay. And does it work? Should you waste your time doing this, right? Should you be making the ask? In our experience, when clients have multiple offers, right, and they are willing to go through the process and make the ask, they're getting large returns on investment for that. Average increase is about 24,000, which shouldn't surprise you because that's about 10% of the median physician comp across all specialties. So the fact that employers are rightfully trying to reduce their labor costs, most of you are walking into an employed setting. There's going to be margin there, and there's going to be room to push if you really want to. Okay, so it's worth your time. And with that, I will take any and all questions that you got. Okay. All right. If we use Resolve services, are all of the data points included in the services? The answer is yes. So you're going to get access to all of MGMA's reporting, custom reporting. You're going to get access to all of our data that we've got as well internally, as well as attorneys that work with, physicians to help them negotiate. So all of that is included. How do you bring up that you have other offers that offer higher salary? I think you just have to say it. So when you're talking about what you're asking for, and when you're making an ask on compensation, I think it's fair to say that you want to be paid fairly for what you're doing, and you've reviewed market data, and you've looked at not only the surveys, but you also have competing offers, and based on all of those things, right, you'd like to see a number of X, right, whatever that number is, or you'd like to see an increase because they're all higher. I think it depends on how far apart they are, what that delta looks like on how you phrase the question, but I don't think there's a way to sugarcoat it. I mean, I think you just have to tell them, right, that you have a higher offers. Now, I wouldn't tell them necessarily who those are with. I think there should be some level of confidentiality between you and a person giving you the offer. So we would never encourage you to disclose, right, this offer's from HCA and this one's from Mayo, right? It's just, I have a competing offer that's, giving me X number of dollars. And if you actually have those offers, it's pretty easy because you're not bluffing right at that point. Okay. Next question is, I'm interested in how you can help with neurohospitalist contracts. Your database doesn't have much or any data for this field. How can I guarantee an ROI if I'm using one of your packages? Well, first, you can't ever guarantee an ROI. So it doesn't matter what your specialty is, because everybody has different value points, right? So we can't guarantee anything through the process, but you're going to have a hard time, I think, anywhere finding data sets on neurohospitalists. We have worked with that specialty before. And so, to be able to utilize not only what's in there, right, but also just our experience and expertise on that, I think would be helpful. I think competing offers in any specialty that has low data sets, right? So you're going to see that not only in that specialty, but others too. A lot of the pediatric subspecialties have very limited data. Your best data point is going to be to have competing offers at that point in time. So I would tell you to utilize any and all of it, but there's no guarantee of ROI for anybody. Okay, next one, is the negotiation supposed to happen via email or video or phone? It can happen in any of those ways, and it happens in all of those ways and in person, right? If you're, renegotiating. The most common question that we get from an employer is, what do you want? Like, what are the edits, right? Show us what you want to see. And so we think it's best practice to say, okay, here's all of what I want, right? I'm not going to hide anything and save issues for later. I'm going to put it all out there. This is what I'm looking for, right? On the non-compete, on my comp, and put it all together in a document. That can be sent via email. Most are going to want to talk through those issues. That can happen via phone or video. I think all of those are possible. Probably not a great answer. What about telemedicine scenarios? As a psychiatrist, is there anything in my contract that I should be paying special attention to? Yeah, I'd be very careful in any telehealth position on what the non-compete looks like, because from what we're seeing, they're trying to be extremely broad with those, kind of banning you from working for any other telemedicine company, which I don't think is enforceable, but it's also shifting the burden to you to have to try to say it's unenforceable. So I'd be really, really careful on that. And then also the outside activities. A lot of the telehealth and telemedicine positions are, a side gig, right? It's not your full-time job. And so I would, be careful on that it's not preventing you from doing something else. How important is it to use a contract lawyer that's in your state? Is there something that sets Resolve apart from the other contract negotiation companies? I think it's important to have expertise first and foremost. The one thing that we do is we have multiple attorneys, and we have an affiliate attorney in every state, right? Or at least licensed in every state. And so I do think it's important. I think it's more important though to have expertise on a kind of a wide range, right, of things and seeing industry norms and standards. What sets us apart, I think, is just that we've been vetted by a lot of your peers. I mean, I think, that's where I would tell you to go to. If you look at Trustpilot, our scores are really high. Most of the national societies, right, for your specialty have endorsed us. So we've got a lot of partners on that. And so I think our reputation is one thing that we, feel very strongly about. And so whoever you use, I mean, please get your contract reviewed by a healthcare attorney. Make sure that happens. But we'd be happy to work with you and answer questions on that if you have any questions. Okay. In my experience, employers tend to want to go over the contract without my lawyer being present. Is that the norm? Well, they certainly would prefer to talk to you, and that's always the case. It doesn't matter what type of employer. It's okay for some of our clients to do it that way, and I think there's certain situations, especially private practice, where I think that's beneficial because you're going to be working with them and hopefully being a partner with them at some point in time. But that being said, if you feel uncomfortable in that discussion, that's one of the things that we do, and that your attorney, whoever you hire, should do for you, is connect with legal, have that discussion. A lot of times it's easier because you're stepping out, you're taking the two business parties, right? The people that are going to work with each other out of the equation and just letting legal handle it. So very common that they would start the conversation that way, and that they want to keep it that way if you let them, but also, something that you can push for and ask for. Okay. What are red flags we should look out for from an organization we are negotiating with? I think any time that there seems to be something that's misleading, meaning their job posting says call is 1 in 5, right? But the contract doesn't say that, and they're unwilling to put it in to the contract. That to me is a red flag, right? I mean, why are they advertising one thing that they're not willing to honor, right? With language, my position is always that if it's true, there's no reason not to put it in, right? And so I think that's the biggest one. Also time pressure, I think, is the other. Sometimes there's legitimate, reasons where they have to have an answer in a week. That's really, really unique though. I mean, usually you should have 2 to 4 weeks to review anything. And so if they're walking you into a kind of a artificial time crunch, I think that's a problem. Any thoughts about locums? Yeah, I guess it would be, again, the non-compete or non-solicitation. Most of those are going to prevent you from working for the employer that they connect you with. And so I'd be, again, careful on what you want to do long-term before you walk into a locum contract. Many of my friends have contracts including language about sponsorship for perm and green card. How can I ensure that mine has this? All my contracts do it have this, and one in particular didn't want to enter the language or even an addendum. Yeah. If you need, right, any type of immigration support, whether that's, a J1 waiver that you're working on, or if it's an H1 where you're working towards perm and green card, that a lot of the employers, I would say most of the employers, are going to be similar to your experience, where they're plugging in a paragraph that talks about them covering the cost, and they're going to move forward on that perm processing within a certain amount of time. If one employer won't do it, that would be a red flag for me. I mean, I'd be questioning why. It's certainly the industry standard and the norm to have that included. So I would push hard on that. Okay. The next question is, thanks for the Resolve reference. Definitely going to reference that. Are there any books that I can read about it? I would just Google it. If you can find books on both negotiation and other contract points, that's where I would look. Is there a way to view a recording of the Zoom? That's a question for Peyton. I'm not sure if this is recorded, if they can watch it again or not.
Yep, this will be recorded, and it will probably take about a week to get on the website, maybe sooner. We have to wait for the link to come back to us before we post it. So, but yeah, it'll be on the website.
Awesome.
All right. Is there any other questions that you guys have for Kyle? One just came in.
Okay. I had a recent hospital refuse any changes to the LOI. They justified it by saying they just reviewed comp for the specialty, adjusted it, and won't review it again. Other hospitals in the area have offered higher base draws. How does one overcome this despite knowing how bad they need help? I mean, I think you're just going to have to tell them, right, that everybody else in the area, I mean, you empathize with them if they just reviewed it and they just made an adjustment. I think that's great, right, that it's been increased, but they didn't increase it enough, right, or the market changed from the time that they brought it in play. That to me sounds like they're trying to get you to commit with this is our right standard contract that we just had vetted, right, and our fair market value analysis just told us that this was okay. It probably is okay. I mean, it probably does fall within fair market value. The problem is that fair market value is a range. It's not a set number. And so if there's competitors in the area that are offering more, I would certainly bring that to their attention and push on them. If employer is not willing to change certain parts of the contract, is there anything else you can do to have them reconsider? Yes, I think you're gonna have to tell them that you're gonna go a different direction, right? I mean, you can convince, not convince is the right word. You can show, right, employers data all day, right? But if somehow through the process they feel like you're either one going to take the job because you've already told them you are, or if it's a renegotiation and they don't believe that you know are legitimately willing to walk away, right? Unfortunately, there's not a lot of incentive for them to just pay you more because, right, or to change a certain part of the contract just because they think it'll help keep you, unless they have a fear that you're going to walk, right? And so that it doesn't have to be comp all the time, but I think you have to keep your options open as much as possible, because if you don't, it's just going to put you in the situation of kind of like you're phrasing the question of what else can I do, right? I've shown them that the median is 20,000 higher and they just don't care, right? Because they don't think I'm going to walk away. But I think you're going to have to push them right on that again. I also know I'm maybe painting this picture that, you know, all employers are bad and out to get you. It's not necessarily the case. I mean, there are a lot of good organizations, right, that do, you know, what I would consider honest, right, fair market value assessments, and, you know, they're making good adjustments, and they understand how difficult it is to recruit and retain and the expenses that go along with that. But there are a lot that are not, right? There are a lot out there that are viewing this as a business and big business, right? Healthcare is 20% of the GDP. And so if they can save 5 or 10% on every single contract, they're going to do that. And I don't know that that makes them bad people, but I think it certainly forces you to make sure you're armed with information and that you're playing the same game they are. Okay, what happens if you break a contract before you actually start? It depends. So all contracts are going to have language in them that talk about the effective date of the contract. So when the contract is legally in place, and that may be different than the start date of when you were supposed to begin, right, providing services. And so if the effective date is when you signed, which is often the case, then you're going to be stuck with the terms in the contract, meaning you're going to have to give them a certain amount of notice. And then if you give them that notice, you know, you may still have some non-solicitation, non-compete, you know, things that are in place. Again, I think it's unlikely that those would be enforceable, right? If you've never worked there, how can they enforce a non-compete? But it's still going to be a position that you're going to be in, right? To have to give them proper notice and to make sure that you're not in a damage situation. So I think it depends heavily on the document that you signed. Can I give some examples of good employers? I'm not going to name any employers good or bad on this. I just don't think that's fair to them. Any strategies for negotiating when they already are offering at or above the median? Yeah, that's a great position to be in. If they're at median or above, you know, then I think it's a question of how high can you push them and how high is the demand in the area. So most organizations start to get nervous about total comp when it hits the 75th percentile. So median's great, but there's certainly room on top of that. Depending on what those other incentives are, you know, what the signing bonus looks like and how much that's going to be counted towards, you know, FMV every year, you know, based on what's forgiven, what their benefit package looks like, all that stuff. But again, it's no different, right? I mean, it's going to be competing offers. It's going to be what the data set says, and it's also going to be how much volume they think they have for you. Because really, that's what a guarantee is, right? It's a forecast of what they think you can produce. Maybe not year one, but for sure in year two. And so if there's a very high demand area that they can justify getting you to the 60th or 70th percentile, I think that's how I would approach it. Yeah, employers often say they can't pay higher due to Stark law. Is there anything to that? Do safe harbors ever apply? Yeah, so Stark is a real thing. So, I mean, as a starting point, right, there are rules that say you can't, and you're not supposed to violate that law, and you're not supposed to pay for things that are unreasonable and outside of the market norms, right? They don't want to look like they're paying for referrals. That said, a violation of Stark, it means that they are extremely high, right? I mean, 90th percentile or more with production that can't support it. So, like I said earlier, the 75th percentile is kind of the threshold that a lot of them, once they start to hit that for total comp, they may get a little bit worried, or they may want opinions on why they're above that. But if you're producing, let's say at the 80th percentile, and your comp is at the 80th percentile, that's not a Stark violation, right? I mean, somebody earns the 99th percentile and they're not in violation of Stark, right? If they can support it with data underneath of it. So they utilize that because they want to inject some fear right into you, and that they don't want to violate the law, and obviously you don't either. But getting to that level means that your compensation is extremely high. One of the contracts says that the compensation can be changed based on the market. Is that something that's included in most contracts? A lot of contracts will have some type of evaluation, right, that happens. I think how it's framed, I think is important. You obviously don't want your comp to go down, right, or have the fluctuation go in a negative direction. But if they're going to review a survey, for example, and they're going to say that your comp is guaranteed at this level, or the survey, whichever is higher, I think that's okay. I mean, that's going to remove, the need for you to force them to negotiate with you and to review it at that point in time, assuming they're looking at the right data set. So I don't think I don't think it's the worst thing as long as it's phrased the right way. If they're not able to tell you the work RVU per code and the dollar amount per work RVU because they're reconstructing the dollar amount per work RVUs for next year, what would you tell them? Yeah, I think it's similar to the last question. I mean, I think you can the RVUs per code is not something that they can decide. The dollar amount is, but I mean, the CPT codes are equivalent to a certain number of work RVUs, and that's set by CMS. So that part is not a true statement. The dollar amount per work RVU, certainly they could change that. Now, you could set a floor, right? It's at least going to be X, right? While you guys work on your model. I would question how quickly they'll get that model into place, right? As well. So I think you're thinking about it the right way. What should you be looking for in a contract for your goals to become partner? I'd want to have some language about what partnership looks like, meaning what's the time frame that we're going to talk about this and have a good faith conversation. I'd want to know what the buy-in looks like, what the practice financials are, right? What am I getting when I buy in? You can't usually, I mean, it's like less than 1% will actually mandate that you become partner. And I don't think you necessarily want that either. You want a time to vet them and vice versa. But what you do want is certainty on, if we get to a good spot, you guys like me and I like you, what's the formula going to look like? How long do I have to buy in? Is it internal financing, or do I have to go find external financing for it? So all of the terms can be laid out without having that mandate in place. So I would look for those types of clauses in language. Is dollar per work RVU in the various employer data sets? Yes, it is. What's the average salary difference between hospital versus private practice? That varies a lot by specialty. That said, it's not always the case that the medians are higher in a hospital setting. And also the thing I tell you to be careful on or to realize is that in a hospital setting, you're not going to be allowed to have any ownership of any type of ancillary revenue, where in a private practice you can. So if there's surgery centers or labs or, if anything else that's out there that the practice might own, real estate, right? All of the revenues from those things you're able to participate in a private practice, but you're not able to in a hospital. So sometimes it's large. I mean, when you're talking about guaranteed comp early on, I mean, sometimes these health systems can offer, 6-figure signing bonuses that the private practices just won't. But it also is a situation that, long term, you may earn 6 figures or more every year from a surgery center that, you'll never have access to in a hospital. So I think it's very case by case and very specific. Should we ask for coverage before we sign the contract? I'm not sure what that question is. Should we ask for coverage? If you can rephrase that for me or add more detail to it, I'm happy to try to answer that. Is there a cheaper way to access the MGMA or other data sets as a trainee? The least expensive way, in my opinion, is to utilize the Resolve site. The data package is less than $200. That's as low as I think you'll find it. That said, if you're a trainee, I'll give you one caveat to this. Sometimes your program will have it. Meaning if you go talk to your program director or somebody else, they may have access to it. A lot of times what you're going to find though is that it's old, and that's the problem, is that it's the surveys are already a year old. So the 2022 survey is based on 2021 data, right? And so you want to make sure you've got the most relevant data. But you could check there as a starting point. Oh, coverage. The coverage question was weekend and holiday coverage by their providers. Yeah, that to me, that's a call coverage question, right? And so the answer to that is yes. Most contracts are going to start out being very broad, right? And they're not going to define what your weekend and holiday coverage looks like, or who's going to cover you if you're gone, or what your participation in that pool looks like. And so, yeah, I would certainly want that defined in the contract.
Okay, we have about 7 minutes left. If anyone has any last minute questions, we can go ahead and answer them, but it will cut us off at 7 p.m. Central Time. So just want to let you all know, if you have any last minute questions, go ahead and get those in. Give it a minute or two.
Also, I didn't put this on the slide, but my email is kyle@resolve.com. So if you guys do have questions that you don't feel comfortable asking in the group setting, feel free to shoot those over. Kyle@resolve.com. If I can answer it, I will try to. And sometimes that's the case.
I just put your email in the chat in case.
Thanks, babe.
Yeah, no problem. Well, if nobody has any other questions for this webinar, we will go ahead and wrap things up. This was our last webinar of the year. And after this, like I said earlier, this webinar will be posted on our website. Once it's posted, you guys will be able to access this, and also there'll be like our 2024 schedule on there as well. But if there's no other questions, we can go ahead and sign off. It was great having you, Kyle.
Thanks. Good luck, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.